many ways, Ferris Bueller's Day Off is about seeing the bigger picture. But, quite simply, it's a very silly comedy that can be used to better understand the physiology of love, learning, and philosophy. To begin, let's talk about hormones, particularly cortisol. Falling in love causes cortisol to anybody rise, while laughter causes cortisol to anybody to drop. This rise in cortisol helps us to see the truth through our rose tinted lenses. Similarly, in a comedy, the truth of the characters' lives aren't eclipsed by romanticism. In Ferris Bueller's Day Off, his parents are naive, and Ferris is bad at acting. Moreover, according to the Framingham Heart Study, microstructural changes in the splenium of the corpus callosum and the posterior corona radiata, as well as lower volumes of various lobar gray matter, were observed in adults subject to higher serum cortisol, particularly in women. And, perhaps in Ferris's case, we see him with Sloane and we think, yeah, right, she would never go for him. He's too poor for a car, or at least he thinks he is, and that is the end all be all for high schoolers. He's also skipping school, he challenges authority, and he's not even a good actor. But by the end of the movie, we begin to understand. Likely, this nature of cortisol affects the conditions essential to laughter, given the role that the posterior corona radiata plays in the expression of laughter, and given the role that the amygdala and the thalamic areas play in laughter, that doesn't derive its inception in the prefrontal cortex. The microstructural changes of the splenium may be unrelated, but MRIs of laughter tend to observe excitement throughout the entire brain, so it is probably related to the corpus callosum somehow. Moreover, while the microstructural changes of the splenium that are associated with cortisol may not play a role in laughter, they likely play a role in the doubtful nature of people being critical, literally trying to see the world without rose tinted lenses. And if you're still watching this, just bear with me. Most of our understanding of neurology, that is, the neurology of comedy, is from the past couple of decades. The MRI wasn't even invented till the early 90s, and I'm not a doctor of this new study of neuroscience. I'm just a philosopher that likes books. So, put simply, I am proposing a philosophy that compares the brain to a hairband on my wrist. So, consider, if you will, that if we are falling in love, we feel stress. And when stressed, we see flaws rather than reasons to laugh. But under enough stress, we may finally be able to see through all the flaws. We see them as a person rather than as our love. And that is when we laugh. And the release of that stress hurts like snapping the hairband on my wrist because we feel guilty for having fallen out of love in the first place, for not seeing the beauty of the person we looked at too closely, and for putting ourselves through so much stress to begin with. But once we find ourselves laughing, we fall in love again, and this results in a rebirth of confusion over the other beliefs that we may have, which now must also be subject to critical thought. Comedy helps us navigate the confusion required to create beauty in the real world. So, I think it's important to remember how special it is to find people who help us find the laughter. But in the information era, with the best content at our fingertips, It can be easy to forget how hard it is to make strangers laugh with their whole heart. Personally, I like to record my heart rate, and some of the comedians that I find online are so funny, you wouldn't believe the EKG readings that I get. I love EKGs, so I'd show them to y'all, but I'm pretty sure people would begin to question if I was engaged in something graphic, because the wave function is more complex than an adrenaline field rush, but the heart's still acting like it's dying. Let's just say those EKGs were so intense, if they printed them, they'd probably be banned in Florida. So, what keeps us interested in Ferris is that even though Ferris skipped school, he still has sophisticated thoughts on the existential conundrum surrounding the humanities in 20th century Europe, which may have shaped his own philosophy of the function of education systems in a democracy. The audience, who hasn't studied for such a philosophical history test, doesn't understand if he may actually have a fair reason for skipping school, or if he's just mad. I mean, he did quote the walrus. As a result of his wit, the audience finds ourselves at wit's end, caught in a tension between falling out of love with the truth and seeing the beauty behind the truth. To understand the physiology of this romantic tension, let's discuss the physiology of learning. One form of learning occurs through indoctrination, while the other occurs through critical thought. And these processes are not only theoretical, but exist as their own parts of the brain which have been observed using modern neuroimaging techniques. Indoctrination may occur when a parent conditions a child to be imprinted upon, while critical thought occurs when one party is reasoning with the other, in the way that Ferris engages with the audience to justify creating this experience with the love of his life. These are some fascinating observations, but as a physicist, I tend to be more interested in understanding the physiology from an evolutionary perspective through a functional analysis. So, consider that if our parents successfully found a mate by becoming their parents, and their parents successfully raised a child to find a mate by becoming their parents, then we don't necessarily need to be conscious of how to escape the paradigms of our parents as just a matter of evolution. We need only take a look at Ferris's sister, Jeannie, to see this play out. Jeannie was never allowed to skip school when she was sick. She had gotten caught lying, and, as a result, she internalized her parents' beliefs about school, an imprinted characteristic that was likely imprinted upon her parents by someone who was also imprinted upon by people from a lost world. Don't you hate it when you forget to not accidentally become your parents who grounded you without understanding? Jeannie has a tendency to act like a parent, treating Ferris like a child who must memorize the rules she has. Ferris breaks the rules, so Jeannie withholds her love and refuses to be reasoned with. And though such trauma bonds don't tend to lead to healthy relationships, Jeannie will have achieved some leverage over Ferris and her parents in potential future arguments. By attempting to condition Ferris to play the game, Ferris and Jeannie aren't really friends. Jeannie's paradigm is juxtaposed to Sloane's. Sloane trusts Ferris as a fellow reasoning adult who cares for her. But even though he doesn't need Sloane to parent him like he's a child, Ferris does need to get his head in the game in the way that a child becoming a parent would. So, similar to Jeannie, Sloane withholds her love, but in the form of not getting married, as I'm sure any high schooler would. Life is too long to marry out of fear of a few extra early years of worrying about ending up alone. So, in the meantime, call it what you want to, They are friends who love each other. But Ferris doesn't need Sloane to marry him in order to love her, because, in his own words, you can't respect someone who kisses your ass. Ferris kisses his parents' ass, and, while he may respect that they have the power to enforce their rules, he doesn't do this of his own free will. So, his parents will never be able to observe if they can trust him in the way that married adults need to trust one another. This isn't to say that blindly adopting the ego of one's parents is necessarily foolish. Ferris's friend, Cameron, hardly has any parents to be imprinted upon by. Cameron doesn't have the same philosophical motivations for skipping school, but he doesn't have the parental relationship essential to being driven to go to school that day. However, he has internalized the importance of the Ferrari. As a result of Cameron's belief that he is sick, we might think that Ferris is manipulating him. But in reality, at first, Cameron needs to manipulate Ferris into being his scapegoat that he can blame for his lies. And, by the end of the movie, when Cameron accepts the blame, it is revealed that Cameron needed Ferris to call him out on his bull by arguing that he's not sick, just as much as Ferris needed him to live life with. But Ferris isn't a doctor, so maybe Cameron really is sick, and maybe the town really does need to save Ferris. Before we go back to thinking about Ferris, I just want to talk about the art museum scene. It's not too hard to imagine that some young American adults could spend the day experiencing some priceless fine art. It's just a beautiful montage, all leading up to when Ferris kisses Sloane, because that is the best way to kiss someone, to just stare at them, all in the hopes that their eyes slowly let out the question, "Do you really love me, boy?" Ferris will always love her. He would marry her. So, as a general truth, he has nowhere else he would rather be. And this is juxtaposed to Cameron, staring at a Seurat pointillism, seeing a world that consists only of little details. As a whole, this captures an important point of this essay. The movie depicts an insignificant fraction of these characters' lives where they miss school. So we shouldn't take the beauty of that single day as an extreme statement about school in general. This one school day isn't just another dot that represents every other dot on the canvas. It's a special dot. So, to look at the bigger picture once more, notice how, when we love somebody, it's hard to laugh at them. We find ourselves very critical of the people we love because we want to know if we should trust them with ourselves. In the audience, we are wondering if Ferris is trustworthy enough to give our stamp of approval, to project our ego upon, and perhaps to be enlightened by. So we are very critical of him. Given the stress we're under to make this decision, we don't laugh, so we fall out of love with him. But when we cut ourselves some slack and allow ourselves to just be happy, when we take a step back and look at the big picture, like we're at the top of the Sears Tower, we may realize that he has a point. We realize the beauty of the truth, and we realize why we should enjoy the laughter instead of sweating every little detail. In conclusion, I'd like to share that I've been developing these thoughts in this essay for a long time. Back in 2018, I wrote a 3-page essay that I turned into a 7-page paper because I used to have that kind of energy when I was 19. And, well, who am I kidding? I still kind of have that energy. It was titled, "Life Moves Pretty Fast. If you don't close your eyes every once in a while, you might miss it." And it was written in response to a myriad of texts by Henri Bergson. One of the first body paragraphs read, "I inspect his inventions independently. I imagine it is important to introspect on idiosyncratic isomers of inquiry, but there's only one way to ask what I have to ask. Am I dreaming?" He sits back as he says, perhaps, I apperceive that my present moment is being in the presence of Bergson and attempt at pinching myself to test the bounds of the actuality of this non reality. He sees this and speaks to it, dreaming or not. Nevertheless, I'd say this is certainly real. For the life of a dream is a phantom memory which seeks materialization, but being awake seems hardly different, because sensations fit forms which beg to be related to memory, so as to fill the given form. Therefore, it is memory which determines what form is raised up to be presented to our consciousness, awake or asleep. This is one of my first essays, so the professor, Dr. Hopkins, said it was pretty cryptic at times, and I didn't get an A plus. And he was right, though I guess that's kind of obvious. Fortunately, I knew that skipping school can obviously be unhealthy, and I adapted, and I adopted a more practical style of writing philosophy, even if I did so without necessarily being led to engage in critical thought on writing itself. But the point to be made here is that what we as individuals and as a society make existence out to be may very well be an oversimplified philosophy given to us without any real reason. Our failures to escape these paradigms result in a sense of perpetual confusion that only ends when we finally realize the beauty of what we are missing out on and what life can be in this world that our elders never had. A world of computerized school administration systems, MTV, and faster cars. Or put simply, in the words of Ferris Bueller, life moves pretty fast. If you don't look around every once in a while, you could miss it.